my high school presentation on Monday. So I was invited to speak at Palos Verdes High School and Peninsula High School in Palos Verdes. And I was invited to speak at the comparative religions class. Now, as it turns out, I've been speaking at Peninsula High School for 20 years now, which is a really long time. I don't know where the time went. The students are all about the same age. I always get older. Ain't that how life works, though? So I'm going to talk today about explaining Buddhism to students in America who aren't Buddhist. I asked the question, is anybody here not a Christian? And 5 hands went up. But they were Jewish and Muslim. And there weren't any Buddhists or Hindus in the class. And so my job was to give them a thumbnail sketch of Buddhism, something that they could understand and use in their comparative religions class. So hopefully some of the answers that I gave them to their questions will be useful for you as well. So the big question to start off with was, how did it all start? Was there a first cause? Did God intend us to be on planet Earth? And the answer from a Buddhist perspective was, there is no first cause. It always has been and always will be in some form or another. Now, this is difficult for people in America to hear because we like to know how it started, and more importantly, why it started. And we don't have those answers available to us in Buddhism. So if somebody says, how did it all start? You would say, as a Buddhist, well, it's always been here. Then the question is, well, do you have justice in Buddhism? Now, the students were watching television and they were watching the Supreme Court nomination, and we have the Chief Justice and we have the Supreme Court, the highest level of courts in America. And justice will be served by them, and they said, do you have justice in Buddhism? And I said, no, we don't have justice in Buddhism. And we don't have a divine lawgiver to define for us what is right and what is wrong. And then they said, well, what do you have? And I said, we have karma. Karma defines for us how skillful or unskillful we are by how much suffering we're experiencing or not experiencing. So this idea of karma was foreign to them, and I explained it in this way. Karma is what you think, what you say, and what you do. The results of thinking, speaking, and acting is called vipaka, or the consequences of your thought, your speech, and your action. Do we have evil in Buddhism? Do we have good in Buddhism? We lack both of those. Rather than good and evil, we have skillful and unskillful, wholesome and unwholesome, kusala, akusala. Now, we can wait for the consequences to occur and then realize if we were skillful or unskillful. But we can also look at the intention behind our speech and action to sort of get an idea if it will turn out to be skillful or unskillful. So the proper intention for skillful speech or skillful action is one that's based in generosity, compassion, and wisdom. The intention that will cause us more suffering because of what we say and what we do will be greed, hatred, or delusion. So as we are getting ready to speak or act, Take one moment and observe your intention. What mindset do you have? Will it be rooted in greed? Will it be rooted in generosity? So just the other day, I was at Vaughn's supermarket right down the street. And I had an intention of greed arise that dictated my activities. And that intention of greed that arose was buying a box of 10 Hostess cupcakes individually wrapped for under $3. I couldn't resist that intention arising. But if I had been more skillful, I would have said, I'm buying the 10 so I can share half of them. That would balance the greed with generosity. Did I do that? No. I ate the 10. So as a Buddhist, not having justice or divine lawgiver to define for us what is wrong or what is right about what we do, think, and say, it is up to us. There's a certain level of personal accountability. Now, the next question that came up was, the Buddha a god? Because in some cases, the Buddha is worshipped as a god. And there's bowing and offering of food or flowers, and there's prayer, there's chanting, there's reflection, there's mindfulness. All these things are applied to the Buddha. So who was the Buddha? Was the Buddha a god? Because if you're a Christian, Jew, or Muslim, you definitely have a god. We have, rather, a perfect human being. Now, perfect in the human sense. When I talked about the intentions, his only intentions were generosity, compassion, and wisdom. He had perfected his mind to the point of not having any negative thoughts at all. And he did that through personal discipline, meditation, and insight into the true nature of what it means to be a human being. So the Buddha was never more than a human being. And as it turns out, anybody can be a Buddha. A Buddha is a designation. I have woken up. The Buddha woke up. And we call him a Buddha because he woke up. We call a man or a woman president because they were elected. Anybody can be a president. Anybody can be a Buddha. Now, we honor him because what he did for us is left behind his path to his perfection, which turns out to be nirvana. So we don't look at the Buddha as a god. We look at the Buddha as a human being, a man, someone through his own effort, his own insight, and persistence achieved the highest state of human perfection. Now, as I talk about him, the question came up in class, has there ever been a woman Buddha? So far, according to some traditions of Buddhism, we have had 28 Buddhas, Siddhartha Gautama being the 28th Buddha, and we already know who the 29th Buddha is going to be, and it is a man, and his name is Maitreya Buddha. But we don't know who the 30th Buddha is going to be. And that very well could be a woman. There is a certain level of equality in human existence between men and women, but culture and society seems to divide the gender and give more credence to one than the other. And it's been that way since the beginning of time for some reason, and childbirth may be the reason. So one of the students asked, well, how about freedom? Do women and men have the same freedom? And I said, in our society, no. That it took until 1919 for women to be able to vote. They weren't allowed to vote. And we take that right now as a given. So what did we have before in the Buddha's time if men and women didn't have rights? They had duties. the duty of the man to the woman, the duty of the husband to the wife, the duty of the children to the parents, the duty of the employer to the employee. We had duties, and they were well defined, and that's what we needed to follow if we wanted to suffer less. But we also now, in the 21st century, have rights. And the rights are being defined as we speak, as I speak. People are in Congress and the Senate and the Supreme Court defining and deciding what rights we have. Now, the rights are given to us in the same way the duties were given to us. And as it turns out, the rights can be taken away because they were given. So are there any inherent rights in being a human being according to Buddhism? I have come up with two. We have the right to suffer, and we have the right to die. And everything else is up to us. Everything else is up to us. So this is a lot of responsibility for a Buddhist that other religions don't have, because they say, we'll be taken care of, we'll be forgiven, grace will be applied to us. But a Buddhist can't say that. Karma will never forgive you. Karma has no eyes, no ears. It can't hear your cries. It's blind to your postures. So how do you change the arc of your life if we have karma and not justice? If we have done something unskillful and the results have not occurred yet, is there anything that we can do as a Buddhist to change the outcome of our unskillful karma? Absolutely. Our job is to do something right now, to be proactive, to do skillful and good speech and action in order to avoid the outcome of our unskillful speech and action. So think of it this way. Think of it as being a forest pond. And you take a teaspoon of salt, and you put the salt in the pond, and the pond is so big that it absorbs the taste of the salt, and you can't taste it. That's what the good karma will do to the negative consequences that may or may not occur in the future. But if you do nothing, it's like putting a teaspoon of salt into a glass of water. And there's so much salt and so little water that the taste is obvious and doesn't go away. And that's what happens when you wait for the results to occur without doing any proactive, skillful, good karma, speech, intention, and action. So because we don't have a God, the students were very concerned about us. Well, where do you go when you die? If no one is going to give grace to you, or there's no heaven for you to go to. And I said, oh no, it doesn't quite work like that in Buddhism. We have 33 heavens and 33 hells, according to some forms of Buddhism. We also have a fantastic heaven called Pure Land. And what you need to have is faith, vow, and devotion. Say Amitabha's name 3 times with faith, vow, and devotion, and he will personally escort you to his heaven. But with all the heavens we have in Buddhism and all the hells we have in Buddhism, that's not our ultimate destination. Every Buddhist in the world has one destination in mind, and that is nirvana. It's said when you go to Pure Land, all the creatures, all the trees, all the rocks, all the rivers speak the Dhamma. And you're guaranteed to achieve nirvana once you make it to heaven. We are fortunate to be humans on earth because we have enough pain to keep us honest and enough pleasure to keep us from committing suicide. So this is the best place to practice the Dharma. And we have teachers that are sharing with us how they understand the Dharma to be. Teachers sharing with us what they are doing, but not teachers telling us what to do. In Buddhism, the teachers are our friends on the path We're walking side by side with them. They have been walking longer than we have in a lot of cases, and they have suggestions they can make to help us along with our practice. But they generally and probably never tell us directly what we need to do to achieve nirvana. Because for the most part, they haven't achieved nirvana. We're all in the same place. And when nirvana occurs, then we listen to how they did it. So when you read the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, the current Buddha, he's telling us what he did and how he did it. And he's speaking to a variety of audiences. So we have some politicians, we have some really smart people, we have some not so smart people, and all the different ways he explained what he did to achieve his nirvana is available to us today in 2018. So then the next question was, well, how did he achieve nirvana? And I said, oh, we are so lucky because we have his first talk, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. And he goes into great detail what the path is to nirvana, what he rediscovered that had been lost to the world. 27 Buddhas prior to him has done the same practice, but it had been lost when the last Buddhist practicing died. So he came down, he rediscovered, and he started to share with us. In his first talk, he said, I have discovered 4 things that are really important if you're a Buddhist. The first thing is that life is ultimately unsatisfactory. And people go, wow, I thought life was pretty good. You know? And most of the time it is. But it changes, and we're disappointed when it changes. And I posted something on Facebook today. Reality keeps getting in the way of our happiness. And it's true. No matter how hard you try to be happy, it's ultimately temporary and fades away. And you can have as much money as you ever wanted, or have a wonderful wife and children and a big car and a nice house, and still, ultimately, your life will be unsatisfactory. Because, number one, you're going to get sick. The Buddha warned us we're always going to get sick. That's why he encouraged us to take medicine. You know, now that marijuana is legal, there's a big confusion about, well, is it medical marijuana okay if you're a Buddhist? Because it's medicine? Well, the Buddha always encouraged us to take medicine. It's up to you to define, up to you and your doctor to decide and define what your medicine is going to be. But there's nothing wrong with taking medicine. He also said, if you live long enough, you're going to get old. And it's going to be really uncomfortable. You're going to find places in your body you never realized could be painful, and they are. And your walking will be a little subject to pain as well. When you watch old people walk, it's almost like they're balancing. You know, they don't want to fall over. And it's amazing how difficult it is simply to walk after a certain age. And then we're all going to die. No matter how healthy or how long you have lived, we all have that same ending. We're all going to end up in a 6-foot box, maybe some of us 6'5", but we're all going to end up in that box. So that's why life is ultimately unsatisfactory. Sickness, old age, and death. Then he said, it's the desire we have to have a good life, to be healthy, to stay young, that keeps creating the suffering for us. Thirst, attachment, aversion. We keep struggling with that, holding on to the good, pushing away the bad, but we never get it right. Because as a Buddhist, we're not born in original sin, we're born in original ignorance. We can't see the world the way it really is. Number 3, finally we come to the good news of his first talk. He said, I have discovered nirvana. And nirvana is the end of karma, the end of all future rebirth, the end of suffering. Wow. So there is an answer to all this. And in order to find nirvana, to realize your nirvana, which is already there, we have to follow the Eightfold Path if we want to. The Buddha didn't say we had to follow it. He said if you want to end your suffering, if you want to stop being reborn to suffer again, then this path will lead you in that direction. But it's always up to you. It's a voluntary path. Okay, so what is this path? It's right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And by following those 8 path factors, we will end our suffering right now, in this very lifetime. So at this point in my presentation, I asked if anybody wanted to achieve nirvana today. And not one hand went up. So I said, well, why wouldn't you want to do it today? And one of the students raised his hand and said, well, we have a very important football game on Friday. And I don't want to miss it. I said, okay, I understand. So it's fascinating when you think about it that here we have the answer to our problem. The problem is suffering. And yet most people won't take advantage of the teaching, and they want to postpone it until they find their girlfriend or boyfriend or buy the new car or get a bigger house or go on vacation and do all the things that normal people are supposed to do. But normal people are being driven by greed, hatred, and delusion. That's why they keep doing all those things. That's why they buy a $100 ticket to see the Dodgers play a baseball game. You know, and so Buddhism is saying, what does good mental health look like? Would we do all those things if we had good mental health? Probably not. Because we wouldn't have the desire to do those good things or the aversion not to do the bad things. We would simply do things. Does that mean we're no longer ever happy? No. We stop looking for happiness and just be happy. That's the deal. Everybody's looking for that secret to happiness. Happiness is an inside job. So the students are listening carefully now. Listening to this Buddhist guy speak about something most of them had never heard and maybe read a few pages in their book. And tried to make sense of it. Because it's really working against everything we were taught we were supposed to do to have a good and happy life. And now somebody is saying that good and happy life is an illusion. The idea is not to be happy, but not to suffer. So we're sort of taking a backdoor approach to life. And we don't expect to be happy. That's the marvelous thing about being a Buddhist, is you go into all these situations and you don't expect to be happy. And all of a sudden, you're happy. And you go, whoa. But then it goes away. And you said, wow, that was good while it lasted. And then you continue. And then all of a sudden, you're happy again for no apparent reason. And it's not like we're not happy when we're not happy. It's like that's just the way it is. Sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're sad, sometimes we're not. Life. It's life with good mental health. No expectations. No mandatory happiness. I don't know if you've ever been invited to a party and everybody says, this is going to be a great party. And you finally go to the party and it's not. That's mandatory happiness. The idea is to let conditions arise naturally and be sensitive and open enough to appreciate the miracle of your life. Because it is a miracle that we are here today. How many people weren't born this year? You know, infinite. How many people were born? Well, a lot, but not as many as there could be. So to simply be here on earth for 10, 15, 20, 50, 70 years is a miracle. The one planet in our solar system that supports life. And somehow we made it. And it's temporary. And most of us just take it for granted that we have another day to experience, to live. But every day we have lived has been the first day of our life. We have never experienced a day like today before in our entire life, and we will not in the future. This day, our life, this experience is special and unique and should not be taken for granted. And yet we do. We just think, well, it's just another day. I got to do my laundry, maybe wash the car. I don't know if I want to do all that because there's football on TV, and maybe I like to watch football. And, well, I'll just take a nap. There you go. Another day in your life. So can we do something in our life every day and not waste it? What do Buddhists do every day not to waste this opportunity that they have to be a human being on the planet Earth? Well, the first thing they would do is they would recite to themselves the 5 precepts, the moral basis of all Buddhist practice. Today I'm not going to kill anything. Today I'm not going to steal anything. Today I'm not going to indulge in sexual misconduct. Today I'm not going to lie about anything. And today I'm not going to get high. Well, that's how you start your day. Okay. Let's see how well you can do. Let's see how well you hold those precepts. Will any of those precepts defeat you today? Because they're strong, they're heavy, they're hard to hold. Will any defeat you? And so far, so good. And it's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you're sitting in the backyard of the Zendo, and all of a sudden the mosquito appears. And you reflect on that first precept, today I'm not going to kill any living things, and the mosquito lands on you and doesn't fly away. And now he starts sucking your blood. And you go, man, it's really hard to be a Buddhist. And now I'm a blood donor. And the mosquito flies away. And as it turns out, you didn't have to kill him. You could have just pushed him away. You could have gotten up and walked someplace else. But all the while, you didn't kill the mosquito. You were thinking about how precious life is, how special life is. Okay, cool. So now you come to the second part. Every day you want to do a little bit of meditation. You don't have to do an hour and a half and sit in full lotus posture and be a stone. You just, maybe 10, 15 minutes. That's all. And you can start with loving kindness meditation, which is the best way to start your meditation anyway. May I be happy, peaceful, and free from suffering. May no harm come to me. May no problems come to me. May I always find fulfillment. May I also have patience, courage, understanding, and determination to meet and overcome the inevitable difficulties, problems, and failures in life. And there are going to be a lot of failures and problems in life. So now you get your mindset in place, and you sit quietly, and you wait for all those thoughts to fall to the bottom of the glass. Think about a glass of muddy water, and you shake it up, and it's all cloudy, and the mud's going around, and you put it down on the counter, and given enough time, all the mud settles to the bottom, and the water becomes clear again. And given enough time in our meditation practice, our mind becomes clear again. All those thoughts and fantasies and regrets finally just settle to the bottom. And you can feel the clarity. Okay. Now, as soon as you move, as soon as the gong is rung and you have to get up, or as soon as the bell goes off, or as soon as you realize it's time to go to work, it gets cloudy again. But not as cloudy as it was before. And then finally, what you want to do in your day as a practicing Buddhist is you want to have a real deep understanding of what the Four Noble Truths are and what karma is and how you can use karma to your advantage, and then to have skillful intentions arising throughout your day, skillful intentions of generosity, compassion, and wisdom, and act on those, speak on those, act on those. And if you have unskillful intentions arising, greed, hatred, and delusion, pause for a moment. Wait for them to settle. Wait for the next thought to arise, the next intention to arise. And if it's a good one, if it's a skillful one, if it leads to less suffering for you and others, act on it, speak on it. And sometimes noble silence is the best way to be. Sometimes you don't need to say anything. Let your silence speak for you. So as the students kept listening to my story of Buddhism and how to practice Buddhism, they wanted to know some personal things. They said, number one, can you guys get married as monks and nuns? I said, no, we can't get married. They said, but don't you feel like you're missing something, not having children, not having a wife? I said, no, actually I'm grateful. Because it gives me more time to work on myself. It gives me more time to read books, post on Facebook, work on my website. It gives me more time. I don't have the distractions of a family or the expense. One of the reasons the Buddha didn't want us to get married was because it's really expensive to be in relationship and then have children and then have the mortgage and the car payment and college tuition and the doctor, and the list goes on and on and on, which is all part about being a human in a family, in a relationship, having children. But as it turns out, in Buddhism, as in Catholicism, we have an optional lifestyle available to us. Okay, so they were really curious about that and found that fascinating. And then they brought up the fact about being a vegetarian. Are all you Buddhists vegetarian? I said, no. The Buddha wasn't a vegetarian. The Buddha was a beggar. And beggars can't be choosers. And he and the monks would go from village to village, house to house, and stand there waiting for a donation. They wouldn't ask for it. Their eyes would be on the ground and they'd have a begging bowl in their hand. And what the family had eaten that day, the leftovers, were given to the monks and the nuns. So if they got chicken or fish that day, they ate chicken or fish. If they got watermelon and broccoli, they ate watermelon and broccoli. They looked at food as being a necessity, as being medicine. And they were taking the food so they could live another day, practice the Dhamma, and eventually achieve their nirvana. That was the whole idea. They weren't eating food to be big and strong or beautiful. They were eating food because there was a necessity. So not all Buddhists are vegetarian, I said. But there are some. If you're a Mahayana Buddhist living in China or Vietnam or Korea or parts of Japan, absolutely you are a Buddhist, because generally speaking, they didn't go from village to village or house to house to beg for food. They grew their own food at the monastery. So they got an extra meal that day. They got supper. And the supper was to give them more energy to work in the fields and plant and harvest. Now, they didn't have meat because they would have to have a monk or nun kill the animals and cook them so the other monks and nuns could eat them. And they didn't want any monk or nun to ruin their karma by killing the animals so the other monks and nuns could eat meat. Can a human being live a healthy and long life without eating meat? They can. The downside is they won't eat In-N-Out burgers. But that's life. So, in the Theravada tradition, they say you can't eat meat. There are some rules. You can't eat meat if you hear the cries of the animal being slaughtered for dinner for you. So if you're at somebody's house and they're in the back killing the chicken and you hear the chicken yelling, You can't eat that chicken. You can't eat meat if it's killed specifically for you. Oh, the Buddha's coming to visit us. Let's go kill our best pig and serve it to the Buddha. The Buddha couldn't eat it because it was killed specifically for him. So there are rules in how we eat the meat and why we eat the meat or not. And those rules can be followed, and your life is not a big disaster. It's just another way to live a life. It's a unique lifestyle available to anyone who decides to be a Buddhist or who decides to be a monastic. And most of the vegetarians I know are not doing it because it's best for their health. They're doing it because they don't want the animals to suffer. There's a level of compassion that goes along with insight into the nature of what it means to eat meat and how many animals we have to kill in order to satisfy the needs of all the meat eaters in the world. And most people like meat. I did a wedding, a Vietnamese wedding, and I think it was, no, I can't remember this, but anyway, it was a Vietnamese wedding. It was a big deal. They wanted me to officiate. I officiated, and they had a wonderful vegetarian meal for the monk. And they all had steak and lobster. And I'm looking at the steak and lobster going, man, you know, there you go. That's how life works, you know. So I think after Peninsula High School, I gave a 55-minute presentation. Palos Verdes High School, I gave an hour and 55-minute presentation. 2 hours, standing in the middle of a classroom, speaking about the Dharma. I could have gone on for 2 more hours. There are infinite possibilities on how to practice and understand the Dharma. And we have 3 major schools, Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana. And if anybody comes up and says, I know Buddhism, you know, you're going to have to just take that with a grain of salt. Because you could spend a whole life and not understand one school of Buddhism, let alone understand 3 schools of Buddhism. But the whole idea is not to understand Buddhism. The whole idea is to practice Buddhism. That allows us to ultimately realize our own nirvana. Thank you for listening.